Hey everyone out there, of course, this is WebDM. I'm Pruitt and Jim, and today we are, as you can see, speaking with one Brennan Lee Mulligan of College Humor CEO fame and Dimension 20 DM extraordinaire. Still not medicine. It's still not medicine.
Thanks so much for having me, gang. I'm truly so excited to be here. That's right. It's not medicine. We have to, now that the vaccine is actually real, we now need to do the complimentary CEO being like, the vaccine is not laundry detergent. Please don't clean your clothes with
this.
Don't waste it.
It's too expensive.
Please don't waste it. There's such a limited supply of it.
Can I use my vaccine if it's been out of the fridge for more than 4 hours?
Yeah.
For my clothes.
Yeah. It didn't remove that stain very well.
No.
Very good. Very good.
But Brennan, just off the bat, I got a question for you. I love asking people who are like in the worlds of like acting and gaming, like when it comes to preparing for a role or preparing for your game, which do you think informs or betters the other?
This is an awesome question, and I feel like I think there's a few people that kind of have my similar track that have gone through it, but I think maybe not too many. Like a lot of the people that I play with on Dimension 20 are people who were already very accomplished sketch comedians and improvisers by the time they really picked up D&D as a hobby. And for me, I'm very much the photo negative of that I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons since I was 10 years old. And when I say playing, I mean like all day Saturday and all day Sunday for years as an adolescent was playing D&D with 2 different groups of friends. I had so many friends that wanted to play that we needed to do like a Saturday group and a Sunday group so that we could rotate them all in. And then even with that, me and my brother were such huge, just fiends for the stuff. We had our entire room was, the whole shelf was just D&D box sets and paraphernalia. We had minis up on the wall and everything. Me and my brother, when we were like, 11 or 12 years old, would sit at the head and foot of one or the other's bed, mono campaign DMing for the other, like single PC campaign on the weeknights in between. So very, any of the like actor performance stuff, because I was an improviser at the Upright Citizens Brigade, obviously college humor. I have the inverse of that, where all of that is extremely informed by D&D. That's kind of the nucleus, and then everything else, all the sort of satellite stuff came out from that.
I love this like solo gaming when you're younger, right? Because getting that many people together when you're 10 or 11 is just who has like how does this happen? You have to call parents. There's all kinds of things involved. So there was a lot of solo gaming, just me and one other person. So for me, it was like me and my best friend, and we just swap off who was running, the other. I don't think we used a single rule, even though we had rule books open, dice, all of that, right? Like I cannot recall. This would have been Star Wars West End. I don't know how it works at all. I just know we rolled bucket loads of D6s and used our micro machines as miniatures. So there you go.
100%. But to your point, I don't like when I think back at being like a teenager, especially like being really adolescent, like how did anything happen? How did we ever hang out? How did we ever, you had those memories of like looking back at your life and you're like, oh yeah, the first date I ever went on as a teenager, my mom dropped me off. It was like, here you go. Like, you're at the diner. I'll be back in, 45. And this is like early days of even like teenagers having cell phones. It's that very elder millennial vibe of like, what the hell was going on? I was flirting on AOL Instant Messenger. Bizarre. And for D&D as well, that kind of like logistical, I have a lot of like nostalgia for diners, and people will sometimes be like, what's the deal with diners? And I was like, well, there are certain places, especially like, like New Paltz, High Falls area of New York, where it's like, oh, if you're not going to like, that's where you have to hang out, unless you're hanging out in the dark forest at night. Those are your those are your spots to pick. But yeah, especially with like the D&D rule books as well. Yeah, I remember being 10 years old and just having the Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, and Dungeon Master's Guide and being like, incredible. Yeah. Under no circumstance will I be reading this, but it is my most treasured possession. Like you're 10 years old and you're like, cool, like different poison mechanics. Okay, God, I'm so hyped up on sugar and popcorn, just trying to focus to read this, paragraph of text. Yeah, some sloppy mechanics in those first couple of years.
Very much. A lot of reverse engineering from a table. Like this is what the table says. I'm just gonna roll and make it up. Yeah, see what happens. Kind of thing.
Because you guys, I'm sure we're all, everyone here has played second edition. We're because like I came in second edition.
Same.
Yep. Yeah. Second edition here. Yeah. In the late 90s.
Yeah.
When I first started, and so I remember my mom dropping me off for D&D one time. I was like 23, but yeah. At least she did tell me she was praying for me on the way home.
That's true. That's true. No, I started when I was 10 or 11, but it was with Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And that was an outgrowth of the fantasy battles. And then it was Star Wars. And so I didn't start playing Dungeons and Dragons until 98, 99. But I had this sort of precursor where I was doing my own thing over there. And then I got into D&D and it was like, now I'm a D&D player.
but we had growing up, or not growing up, but when we were playing second edition, we didn't have a diner we usually went to. We just went across the street from the movie theater we all worked at to Whataburger, which if you've been in the South, you know what Whataburger is. But if you don't, you're missing it. So
it's kind of a diner, sort of.
It's sort of a diner by way of fast food.
24-hour greasy food.
Yeah, that's all you want.
The spirit is there. The
spirit's there. Yeah.
That's a wild thing. That I feel like that. Yeah, I started in 98. That was when I first picked up the game, and but yes, the idea of having a kid that young, again, like fifth grade or whatever, looking at Thaco, are you kidding? Like looking at a rule that Byzantine and Draconian. It's a miracle that we played the game. I think by the time I was like 12 or 13, we were like 80 to 90% rules compliant, which that's a feat, man. If you're getting anywhere, like pushing 60% of the rules are being used correctly, I feel like, bravo to Tiny Brennan and company, back in the day.
And that's a whole edition before feats were introduced too. So
yeah.
Sure. Oh yeah. So D&D got its hooks in you pretty early. Second edition even, which is a tough edition to start with, as Rube mentioned. Were you a big like third edition fan when that came along, or were you
huge? Three and then going into 3.5 was my edition. I am actually still playing a 3.5 campaign. I have they're all 19th level. We've been playing for 11 and a half years.
Sweet.
It's wild. It's great.
Why switch? Yeah.
Why switch? And also, especially because so many builds in 3.5 are so wacky and difficult. I can't do the port over to 5e when people have spent literally a decade plus waiting to capstone their insane characters. Like I gotta let them
I gotta let them do it. Come on. And by now it's retro, right? It's retro cool, like 3.5.
Exactly. Yeah. And who doesn't want to run encounters for players who have effectively broken the game from top to bottom? It's very much. I just got to the point now where again, 19th level 3.5 characters. It's like I'll throw a challenge in front of them and be like, hey, I have bent all of my will to making this impossible. So this should be at least a round or two of fun.
Right. Hopefully it's a speed bump that we take a little bit of time to get over.
Yeah. Do you have a book limit on how many books you can use to build your character?
I have come in on some stuff. It's hard because you're piecemeal rule. There were a couple of years there where we were still playing in person. We hadn't moved to playing virtually yet. And because we were playing in person, we only played like a couple times a year. So I was, by the time I got there in person, I didn't want to take time out of a limited weekend of playing to like do bookkeeping. But when we moved to virtual, I actually get to spend like a little bit of time over the past year, especially during pandemic, like being like, wait a minute, what is this feat? And then it'll be like, this is from page 17 of Zordaz's magazine of complete and utter gibberish. And I was like, we're going to rule that source out. We're not going to, we knew enough to like block, wiki homebrew stuff. But even with that, like with all respect to the designers of 3.5, there's some stuff where I think the worst offenders, I don't know if you guys share this for 3.5, the worst offenders to me are like, what is it? Book of Nine Swords and Exalted Deeds. Every once in a while, you got to go back in there and be like, what the hell is going on in here?
I had to be like, if we're using the Tome of Battle, Book of Nine Swords, then that replaces the rogue, that replaces the monk, that replaces the fighter. Like that's just the new martial classes.
Yeah.
And I liked it because it was like magical fighting styles. But at the same time, you can't have like a war blade, whatever, next to a fighter and have it be even remotely apples to apples.
No, 100%. Yes. Yeah. We had an interesting thing in that campaign though, because we do a lot of homebrew. There's a lot of, and we also are very like story first play. It's very funny that I say story first because all of my players will spend hours to days needling over the finest points of character optimization. That being said, it really is story first. We'll do whole sessions where only a handful of dice get rolled, but there is something to that fact of like, I can't just X stuff out because, for example, the character that has that Book of Nine Swords stuff also has 8 levels of sorcerer and homebrewed in the world that sorcerers in this world were purely thematic. So this kid who was a sorcerer, this character is like a luck child where every single spell is only sort of entropomancy. It's only like, wow, you are so lucky. So like protection from projectiles isn't like an abjurative shield coming up. It's just the kid runs through a storm of bullets and doesn't get hit. And it's like, how did that happen? He has the grease spell, but we don't flavor it as a big thing of arcane grease. It's just like, man, your enemies were pursuing you and totally face planted, and they just were fumbling Benny Hill cops, like we just couldn't get it together.
It's a genre changing spell. Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. They thought they were in Game of Thrones, but no, it's something else.
Yakety sax starts playing, and it's like, you thought you were badass, but I'm afraid you're not. I'm so sorry.
Right. So sorry.
A whole different dimensional door where you just come in here and out here and over here.
Yeah. I love this right here because, like, to me, I found this dichotomy between the optimizer and the storyteller kind of player as being set at odds with each other. And I'm like, I don't know that I've ever seen that person in real life. Like some of the people who are getting super involved with their characters and wanting to portray them and role play them to the hilt very often try to like fine tune their mechanical expression.
Excuse me while I Goldblum. I was that. I'm that player still to this day. So it's just, you got to care.
I think 100%. That is my experience exactly. People, there is a false dichotomy there. And I think that it's because the game has both components to it, there are some people that feel a need to justify why one half of the game appeals to them and maybe the other doesn't. And that's totally fine. But I don't think you need to go like, well, the other half, here's why the other half is flawed. Because like you're saying, for myself, it's like, if you only like one, more power to you. That's totally fine. Some people like highway driving more than city driving or vice versa, but a car is made to do both. And you absolutely can, if you enjoy both halves of that, as I certainly do. I just did a one-shot for Pat Rothfuss's World Builders charity, which was so fun. And I made a character that was completely like the genesis of the character was, this would be a fun thing to play, because it was a 20th level one shot. So it's like, what goofy shenanigans can you get up to? And I made a 20th level sorcerer paladin, which is an incredibly effective combo. I did a 1 round drop of 280 points of damage.
Yeah, I bet you did. I bet you did.
Yeah, so it's completely goofy. But the race for the character was Warforged, which is not an optimized paladin thing particularly. I just thought it would be cool. So I think there's a lot of having your cake and eating it too, where it's like, if you want to get into crunch, is fun. It's fun to do a bunch of damage in one hit. It's also fun to make a weirdo. The character was like he was Oath of Ancients paladin and Divine Soul sorcerer, and he was Warforged, so he was very much like a Sylvan Iron Giant, like a sort of druidic Warforged that the forest had brought to life to like defend the wild places. I was just a big old sweetheart, you know, like a sort of druidic you know, construct, and it was very very fun to play.
Yeah, I think in this sense 5th edition is like a step in that direction, whereas 3rd edition and I guess Pathfinder, I wasn't on board that train when it split off, but like that sort of a little bit of nods to mechanical tinkering, but a lot of like you what you can do with your character is a lot more open. You don't have to have an optimized combo in order to have a kind of character that you want. It's okay to not play at that top level, and yet the game isn't going to punish you for it, you know.
The game, I totally agree. The game has become a lot less brutal in punishing a non-optimized choice, you know. And I think 2nd edition, the brutality was written in the text. It was like, oh, you can only get to this certain level if you didn't pick the right race class combo.
Yeah.
Like, Jesus.
Yeah. And your stat rolls were lucky enough. And
yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, you can't even try. It's, you know, the entire point of fantasy is like fantasy. If you look at fantasy as coming kind of from the canon of Tolkien, where he's like, yes, even a very little hobbit can make a difference. And 2nd edition was like, no, they can't. Yeah. They're too weak. And it's like, Jesus.
They have to be thieves.
They have to be thieves, nothing else. And then going from that to 3.5, which didn't have it in the text so much, but in kind of the negative space of the design. Like 3.5 wasn't trying to be brutal, but by the time all the source books had come out, it's like, oh, sorry, you're not going to be an abjurant champion? You're not going to take full BAB progression and full spell casting? Do you hate your character? Why are you doing
just use the player's handbook, you know. Like, that thing that you thought you needed. Right.
Yes, exactly. And then but I think 5e comes around, and 5e, there definitely still is optimization there, because I think the game understands that some people are looking for the ability to like get that dopamine rush of like, oh, I made a good choice. I made a good strategic choice. But you are not completely punished for being like, hey, I'm just gonna go purely off of flavor. And so I can still be helpful. I'm not complete. It's not like, you know, in 3.5, you could have 2 10th level characters that were living in different worlds if you didn't design them correctly.
Yeah, certainly.
Oh, most definitely. Especially like, I don't know about you, but I was the math nerd. I was the math guy at the table always. So when people were rolling damage, I would glance over and be like, it's 32. As they're like counting on their fingers. And so for me, it's always been optimization was like a logic problem that you get to solve. Like, how I want to do the most of this. How do I do that? And you put these different rules in here and you build this thing. And definitely 5e, you don't necessarily have as many moving parts, but you do have some options that overlay very nicely. And it hits the dopamine button just enough for you know, a hardcore optimizer like I used to be.
Totally. I totally agree. And the nice thing too about I think 5e's design mechanically is there's a lot of satisfaction there, because a lot of the optimization isn't completely viewable in a single encounter. I feel like in 3.5, you could watch one encounter and be like, oh, these 2 builds are. Whereas in 5e, it's often like a very optimized, with the exception of like a 20th level goof character like I made in this one shot. For the most part, it's like, oh, the optimization isn't going to ruin every single encounter in terms of imbalance. But like over a campaign, you could definitely make an optimized choice. The damage yield is different for one character versus another. But it's not going to ruin every single encounter through that imbalance, right?
Yeah. And I think that like it's left this space open for some players, at least, to have a bit more expressiveness in their characters and who they want to inhabit as they adventure in these fantasy worlds. And like, I go from crotchety old man that's like, there were 4 in the beginning and that's all you need now kind of moments, to the let's go wild and there's no limits at all. And what I like is that freedom that 5th edition seems to have, of like no limits at all, or at least significantly less, because a Warforged that's animated by a forest that's an Oath of Ancients paladin sounds awesome.
Yeah.
You know, it sounds awesome.
It's very, that's the thing too, is I have definitely like, I think my fantastical sensibilities tend to run, you know, a lot more whims. Like I'm ready. I don't need to be right in the Tolkien pocket to get the high. I actually kind of like, you know, hey, let's get some airships in here. Let's get some warforged. Let's get some weird, like, I don't need every single nation to like occupy the exact same, like, you know, time period influence. If these people are a little bit more Renaissance and these people are a little bit more Dark Ages, that's groovy to me. But I think that there is like you're saying, here's an interesting question for you guys. Like, when you, there are definitely people who, as a philosophical stance, don't go towards optimization. And to those people, I say, you know, go in God's grace, tons of love. Like, if that's really true, that's awesome. There are some people, especially like new players, that will, as a philosophical point, be like, I don't want an optimized character. But sometimes I will sense like, that is something you're saying during character creation, when the first combat comes around and you like, anecdotally, right. I had a player who back in 3.5, she made a paladin character and, you know, maxed out charisma, which is, you know, back in 3.5, I think paladins were still wisdom based actually, but maxed out charisma, and was like, strength is only going to be an 11. And I was like, you know, hey, I want to give you a heads up. You know, this is not, and she was like, no, I just don't think my character's that strong. And I don't really care about the math of it. And I was like, groovy. Hell yeah, let's go. We got into the first combat and she was like not hitting anything. And she was like, what the hell? What's going on? And I was like, well, it's the, you know, here's, you know, sort of like a mechanic pulling up the hood and being like, here's your problem. Right. And
there it is. Point at the 11. Yeah.
Right. Pointing at the 11. But what's interesting is the conversation that we had after that. It really made sense because she was like, well, this is a fantasy story. And in fantasy stories all the time, a hero would be outgunned. But I thought my character would have kind of like a heroic pluck to them. That's why I didn't want them to be strong. I didn't want them to be a big hulking warrior. I wanted them to be the plucky hero. And I was like, hell yeah. I was like, you're not wrong at all. Unfortunately, with this game, there just is no pluck mechanic. There's not a pluck thing that you get to add to dice, really. So we need to figure out a way to strike. And I think that that is something that I would never tell someone uninterested in Crunch that they're wrong. But I would just point out, like, what the end result of this is going to be is you're going to get to combat, and your character, if you have a vision of your character as being very competent, I'm telling you the dice are not going to help you.
Yeah. I've always taken those opportunities to say, let's make something custom together. Because to me, the DIY spirit of role-playing games is one of the main reasons I'm here. And so, like, all right, you're not feeling what you want in the rule book, especially for a new player. I'm not about to just completely cut them off and be like, no, you got to conform to this thing. I want to keep them as open to as many possibilities as they've got. We're going to make something custom so that they can go into combat with an 11 strength as a paladin and still feel heroic, still feel like they're overcoming odds. And like, it seems like, why wouldn't you do that? Like, I don't understand why you wouldn't. So anyway.
Yeah. Hell yeah. I love that. I think that is an incredibly good piece of advice for anyone running their game. It's why my little soapbox I get on all the time. One of the character classes I really miss from 3.5 was the poorly named but extremely cool class in I think the dungeoneering guide or something like that, which was the factotum. Oh, I loved that thing, because the whole point of the factotum was it's basically it's almost like the Indiana Jones archetype of like an intelligence-based, non-magical hero of like, I'm a scrappy archaeologist, or like I'm some kid with a map I found and I'm going to figure it out. And it's like at random moments, you can burn what's called inspiration to add your intelligence modifier. It's the classic thing of like, I'm not a brawny, but I can see there's a chandelier. I'm going to cut the rope and it's going to fall down. And, I loved that character archetype because it actually did a good job of like what you're saying, Jim, like making mechanical the idea of the scrappy, clever hero. And I think that that's a very fun, it's fun to make a mechanic for a thing that is more rooted in that like storytelling trope.
Certainly. I think to speak on another dichotomy, that idea of like mechanics getting in the way of what you want to do or the story that you want to have unfold at your table is like, well, if they're getting in the way, then it's time to change them, because the mechanics should support this thing you want to do. They should enable it. They shouldn't be necessary for it, but they certainly shouldn't like get in the way. That's an opportunity to fix this thing. And again, back to the DIY, like hack it apart, make it your own, you know?
Yeah. Add a little hack and slash of your own.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely.
So I have a question. This is based, Brennan, on an interview of yours that I read, and it seemed like you were likening being a dungeon master to a genie. And and that really stuck with me, especially as we're talking about like character expression and how players approach playing their character. Because one of the things I found challenging once I realized like that I wanted to be a DM for life, I was a lifer, and I wanted to run the best game possible, was like meshing and making some sense out of what might be 4 or 5 very different viewpoints and wants out of a game. And so I'm curious how you've approached that, or, you know, how you handle it these days.
Yeah, I totally agree. I got the bug, and definitely was that thing of like, oh, I'm going to be doing this for a long time. And Lord knows people are hungry enough for DMs out there that if you push past 51% of your heart being there, people will be so happy to take you up on that. So for sure, to the point where you're like, hey, if anyone else wants to run a game every once in a while, I'd be more than happy to. Please.
There are other games? What?
But to your point, the genie metaphor for me is this thing, because even in the terminology, like dungeon master, you're at the head of the table. There's this very hierarchical station to it. But the vibe of being a DM isn't one versus many as like a ruler. I think it's one with many as like, I'm making dinner for everybody. It's an act of, it's very much an act of service. Like, I think the long suffering DM, the put upon DM being like, guys, please, we have to, the dungeon, I put so much time. That's the vibe that it's really, it really, so the reason a genie makes sense to me is it's that classic, it's that joke that like the Robin Williams genie in Aladdin makes of like ultimate cosmic power, itty bitty living space. Of like, yeah, I control the weather and your enemies, and if I so chose, I could drop 100 dragons on your party right now. But we all know I'm not going to, because I'm actually here to serve you. And in fact, I can't even really control where the narrative's going to go, because you guys can just be like, we're going east, and I go, oh, pardon? You know, like, you're going where?
Notes.
Yeah, notes go out the window, and you're like, to the east you see a mist, a confusing mist. Who knows?
Something.
It's a
we go in the
mist
anyway.
Great. In the mist you find a wall with the calendar on it. Yeah, right. And you're like,
I brought a pickaxe. Like,
what do I see in the room right now?
Right, calendar has next week when we should play.
That has happened to me more than once, and it's a moment as a dungeon master where I was like, I could see it happening, and I was like, I've prepped this, I've done this, I'm getting a clear signal they're not interested in that. Which way do I go? And I'm just, for me personally, I'm glad that I went like, let's see where this leads. Like I've always got this for later. I want to see what they want to do. And it's ended up in some of my best campaigns because the players were like super engaged and ready to drive the action.
I think that, I mean, like that is, you know, there's that meme that goes around, the Sam Snorkel meme. I don't know if you guys have seen that. The one about like adventurers walk into a tavern. The DM is like, you see some patrons. There's a group of mercenaries in the corner. There's a goblin drinking at the bar. There's an old bartender. And you see in the corner, covered in eldritch runes, a necromancer with a string. And the PCs are like, what's that goblin's deal?
with the goblin drinking. I want to get him. I got his next round.
Exactly. And what's the goblin's name? I introduced myself to the goblin, and you're like, Sam Snorkel is like the Tumblr post that went around.
Yeah.
And it's like, Sam Snorkel rules. We love Sam Snorkel because, and I this is one of those things where I think technically you could call this metagaming, but it's not bad. It's just that your players actually can't help how intoxicating it is when they can tell that their actions are crafting the world in front of them, where it's like, because that's the thing is what the PCs don't realize is they are even if it's a completely classic game where the PCs are not inventing anything outside of their one hero, regardless, focus and attention is what PCs know they can do to world build, because they know that what they pay attention to gets described. So they go, what's that goblin's deal? And they watch and they go, we're actually building this goblin right now because we are putting you on the spot to build it. And that's intoxicating.
Yeah. We actually talked about this in a recent video on just NPCs in general. And my theory is that it's quick, it's iconic. Weird goblin at a bar is better than and more memorable than the paragraph of descriptive text that you had maybe 5 words to get, that they would land. Goblin at a bar is so much more evocative. Yeah. And then I didn't account for the intoxication of it, which I feel as a player all the time where I'm like, oh, did you not want me to do this? Like, were you not ready for this? Let's see how far I can go.
Yeah. Nature abhors a vacuum. And when you don't describe something, the players are going to want you to. Yeah. It's like, no, this, I don't care about the box text, Yeah,
I think it's very funny. Well, it's interesting. I think players there's 2 competing things going on, which is number one, players are obsessed. After the fact, it always feels like players are obsessed. Like, did you plan that? Was that planned? And they love it when it was planned because they're like, oh, it feels somehow like it has more authority or meaning. If it was like, how did you, like, if you can deliver if PCs think they're being clever and they're like, we're going to go the back door that you weren't expecting. And they open the back door and you're like, your enemy is waiting there. And they're like, how did you know? Right? They love that. But on the other hand, too, when they can know that they're pushing you off the rails into improvising, it feels almost like going to a part of the carnival that you're not supposed to go. It's like, oh, we got back into like the employee quarters. Like, oh, it has that rush of like, we're somewhere we're not supposed to be. So I feel like both of those have their own different tantalizing thing.
Yeah, when the players get on the rise that they are not tall enough to get on,
there you go.
It's the same thing.
I always found that blurring those lines between prep and improv as much as I could really helped me as a DM, because I'd be like, all right, I can't just pull everything off the top of my head if I don't have some kind of idea of what might be there. But if I have it set in stone, I'm going to be so rigid. So I just decided I would lie constantly to my players and never tell them, like, a poker face, like, yep, so that they would never knew what was on the fly, pre-planned stuff I came up with while they were talking about it, kind of moments, because I'm trying to maintain the sanctity of this fictional place. That was real important to me.
I think that's really true. I actually had a philosophical debate with a close friend of mine who was playing in a campaign of mine, and he's brilliant guy. But he was very much like, was this planned? Like, did you plan this or did you improvise this? And because he was like, if it was planned, that makes it more meaningful. And I sort of said, like, I said, like, to kind of pull the curtain and kind of reveal the magician's tricks here, something that I made up at the table is still something I made up. And when I was doing session prep for this, I wasn't like in a golden throne wearing like my preparation crown. I was like in my boxers on the sofa eating cookies. Like that's your like golden authority here. It's like me last Friday being like, maybe there's like a bulette or like an encag behind this door. Okay. Like that's the golden authority we're putting on preparation and planning, is like me being like, that'd be cool. Like,
Right. Yeah.
This chicken nugget looks like a minotaur. Yeah.
Minotaur. Whatever. You know, they're not going to know I'm just using a bear. You know?
Yeah, I'm just using a strange creature with many eyes swats at you, and there's just the bear stat block behind the screen. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
No, of course.
I feel the same when I'm a player, and that's why I get so when I'm a player irritated by a DM who will reveal it to me when I'm just like, you don't have to. Please, like, let's maintain kayfabe here, right? Like, I gotta keep. I'm trying to keep an illusion going in my mind. At the same time, I'm also that player, like you mentioned, where if the situation calls for it, like if it's an investigation or something where like detail and timing and the like really matter, I really appreciate when a DM goes out of their way to have some kind of consistency. You know, there's always going to be some flexibility, but like, oh, I thought there was a clue here, and I looked. And there was, because logic followed. That's also very satisfying. But
yeah, improv with notes. Yeah.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I think too that there's a obviously, and this sort of goes to the idea of there's a big competition between like Sandbox versus Railroad, and I think that like you obviously people, I think going too far in the Railroad direction is like a very well documented thing that people don't like, but I think you definitely can go too far towards the Sandbox as well, because the truth is that like our world right now is the definition of a sandbox. Like you can do whatever you want. You go off into the world. It's a full real world. It doesn't appear. I haven't really in my life experienced anything I would call a plot hook, you know, like that being said, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world that is very much like, it's not, in other words, it's not a passive world. The world is incredibly active. And I think that's the key to like a lot of planning is if you're doing a sandbox, which is literally like the world is static and it's waiting for you as like a sort of Animal Crossing, you know, like it's like this, like go out and, you know, whatever you want to do. There's an element I think that is good about Railroads, which is as a DM, even if you want total player agency and then to do whatever, it's still that thing of like, I'm dropping you into a world where it's, you know, 5 years after the end of this enormous arcane war, or like there's a rumor in the land of these strange riders collecting artifacts. You just throw something like that in there, not to be like, here is the plot hook, you have to do this, but to be like, I think players want to feel like heroes, and what heroes do is solve problems and help people. So it's that idea of like, if you're not throwing something at, like, I love a sandbox campaign. I want to have my decisions matter, but the thing I'm most interested in deciding is how to address the problems of the world I'm in.
Yeah. It's why I always say, like, I don't want a setting that's a utopia. Yeah. Like there's nothing for me to do. And part of the fun of being a player character and playing a character is like seeing your impact on the world and getting to like have that kind of agency, because I don't always have it in my real life, but I can in a role-playing game. And so like being able to influence the world is important. And from a flip side, as a dungeon master, that's one of my number one priorities. But I also find like just throwing players into a setting that's, especially if it's super detailed, and then telling them make your own way here is like, well, now you're not doing your job as a DM, which is to at least at the very least provide a compelling first adventure and see where it goes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that actually, so this is an interesting segue topic of like, I think part of there's this really murky area where, because we know that PCs are solely responsible for the actions of their characters. We know that DMs are responsible for the world building and the actions of the NPCs. Where the kind of sea meets the sky on the horizon kind of place is the backstory of your player characters, which that's a very charged thing. And I think that some people are like more light on backstory. Some people are heavier on backstory. This is charged, man. This is controversial.
Hot takes.
If you look at, let's look at the sort of, the canonical Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. Frodo is Bilbo's nephew. That's why the ring goes to him. Aragorn is the last of the Dunedain. All these people have their motivation for why they're doing what they're doing built into their backstory. And I think that if you look at the beginning of that story as a campaign, I think that if you aspire to the sandbox, if you aspire to true player agency, I am not like a video game engine with like predetermined cutscenes. I really want to honor y'all's choices. Yeah. I think that you still have to go in and be an active DM during character creation. This is my little soapbox. I think you have to go in and because I think in order to do that moment, like you're talking about, Jim, of like, oh, do whatever you want. I think that works if you've made sure that your player is not, Gus with a sword, but rather like, hey, your character was raised, your mother and father were the heads of this wizard's academy that got destroyed by this duke or this church or this merchant's guild or whatever. And you have this book and it's been closed your whole life, but in the past couple of weeks, it started to glow again. Yeah. You do something like that, and then a character feels like, I know exactly what my deal is. And obviously it's a collaboration with the player.
Certainly, yeah.
But I think that like to get the feel of like in fantasy novels and movies and literature, the characters have to be the main characters. Like it had to be Frodo. No one else could be the ring bearer. And I think finding a way to do that in your D&D campaigns is often like the key to making that sandbox style of play really work.
Definitely. I was going to say, first off, you could be Guts with a sword and be pretty badass. You're a Berserk fan. But when it comes to that point you're making, I know one thing I've started doing in my campaigns is not only session 0, but like I usually create a custom questionnaire for that campaign where I ask them kind of pointed questions about that lead me to what style of play they would like, what kinds of adventures they would like. When it comes to whether it's science fiction or fantasy, like what kind of science fiction movies do you like? So I know like what draws them, right? Yeah. If it's heady, full of debate science fiction, then like, okay, well, they're going to have more social encounters and exploration of both the universe outside and within, things like that. And I think that DMs, if you adopt a questionnaire, it can help out a lot, I think.
Yeah, certainly can. I found myself earlier in my DMing career having a lot of characters who would show up in the campaigns with these big backstories. And I was like, in retrospect, my reaction was one of, you didn't wait for the world yet. Like we've made this world-saving sort of prophesied hero, but maybe that's not appropriate. And it took me a long time to realize like that was a missed opportunity to sit down and like get some deep hooks in a player for like what's going to motivate them. And I find that very distant from my own motivations when I play, which is I want to play the game, and whatever facilitates that, I'm fine. I'll play Gus the fighter. After 4 episodes, 4 sessions, whatever, he's not just going to be Gus the fighter. But like for the first one, I'm there. So I've had to do a lot of learning and sort of like approaching this from a very different point of view of like, how do you get people involved who want to be involved from the beginning? And you can also plunk them down in a sandbox and let them have a linear adventure as well. It's possible to do both.
I love that. And by the way, that is so I think you almost want, like, if I was at a table and someone had made the prophesied hero character, someone was like, I have the last gem. I was found on a doorstep by, a husband and wife that, were amazed to have a child and they raised me, but I had a strange birthmark. I'm going to play the dude. It's like, what's up? My name's Phil. I'm a brawler. I'm cynical, but I really like this prophesied hero. I'm just here to throw down for this. Like you want the Han Solo to the Luke, or you want the Chewie to the Han. You want that person who's like, I love that of like, I'm like, if you have the idealist hero, have the heroes like, I don't give a hoot about these ideals. I just like this guy.
This guy's awesome.
This guy's awesome. And if this guy is here to overthrow the emperor, then I'm going to help out. Like,
yeah. Anything he wants to do is great. And besides, he brings me on adventurous situations. Like that's usually it for me.
Yeah.
I'm going to justify whatever I need to be here at the table. And so
if you had his pancakes, I mean, seriously.
Right. Right.
Exactly.
And so I find as a player that leaves me very open to molding who my character ends up being in accordance with the group. And so like one of my first priorities in that situation is to find another character that I might have a connection with, and to do that as much as possible so that my character has an organic reason for being with these group of violent strangers.
Yeah.
But, so that they have that. But I like it to come out and play. So coming back to like rolling with the punches as a DM and but at the same, fostering that player agency to do what they want, to drive the game how they want. I'm one of my constantly refined and evolving practices is like, where's the sweet spot of prep? Like what's just in time prep, what's long term, how is it most efficient? And so I'm kind of curious if you have some tips or best practices that you've discovered for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. My relationship to prep is very different now because the prep for Dimension 20 is so different for the prep from a home game. And it can be very hard after a week of like Rick Perry, who's our head set designer, props and minis designer. Like working with Rick is incredible, but that's a level of like, when I prep a Dimension 20 campaign, I have to prep all 8-9 of our combats months before we even do the first session. You know what I mean? Like, because it takes so long to build these unique. So that's a level of prep where I need to, in my home game style, I'm all improv, baby. I don't know what's behind that door until you open it. Let's go. But that's also less true for like the 11-year campaign than it is for others. Like sadly, I think it all depends on the campaign. For Dimension 20, I need to know, generally speaking, what their enemies are going to be, because I need to know who's going to be in the final combat before we even do the first session, right? So that's a level of like knowing my PCs and being able to guess what routes they go down. And then you have this weird relationship of prep to improv of like, okay, my PCs are going to try to cross a river. I have my 8 stepping stones, which are these combats. Mm-hmm. I need to be able to hurl these stones into the river in whatever direction they're jumping. So it's like, yes, their choices matter, but I know where they're going to end up, but where they're going to end up could be here or here, right? I know you're going to fight these 8, hockey skeletons in a fantasy CVS, but that could happen after a harrowing role-playing episode, or it could happen after a goofy skill challenge. One or the other, we don't know. And it's going to totally change the tone of that battle, one or the other. That being said, because Dimension 20 is very much like my job. If I'm doing like a home game where I'm like interested in the game to a bunch of new people, prep might happen in 30 minutes right before the session starts, just because I also know that during the process of character creation, yada, 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 like pulling a first session, I've done so many first sessions that I don't really need to plan them, right?
Yeah.
And then a third even thing is this like home campaign where we've been playing it for 11 and a half years. So my prep for that is almost all mechanical because, even if we play for another year, another 2 years, I have 11 and a half years of loose ends to tie up. You know what I mean? Like, I know who the bad guys are. I know what these guys want to do. I know where we're headed. Like the world, we're at the point where it's like, we're just resolving the final act. And so it's like, all of this stuff is it literally writes itself, and it's just now the housekeeping.
You're looking at the end of what people usually see the beginning of, which is this campaign is taken off, it becomes self-sustaining, and will propel itself indefinitely, but at some point will come to an end. And I think that end is where a lot of DMs and groups, they never see that point. So it can look weird when you finally approach it.
Oh, I've been playing this game since I was 10 years old. I have, other than Dimension 20, which is a very different animal because it's, a production. I have successfully concluded a single campaign, just the one. It was the one I played from like age 12 to age 17, got to 20th level. They beat all of the gods of the lower planes, and that was it, right?
Yeah. I probably have less than 3, and at least 2 of those ended in true TPKs. Like last sessions, sorry guys, I guess we're done here. And then a partial TPK where everybody else agreed to surrender to the dragon and become their lifelong servant, kind of thing.
Well, gotta be careful going up against
TPK,
dragons. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
but yeah, it's a rare thing indeed to get to the end of a campaign.
For sure.
Yeah, but Brennan, just to go back to your point about the way you have to prepare for Dimension 20, I think it is something that DMs, a skill that DMs should have, which is I think it's sometimes called the quantum encounter. Like, you have this encounter prepared, they didn't go left, they went right. Some DMs will immediately put it to the right when it was left.
Yes.
But or you could just save it. Just save it. They'll get there. And, as the game meanders along, they find their way to it. And I think that is something, as far as prep goes, it's something I know that I've done. Like, when the players didn't use a thing, and I spent like an hour going, well, I'm going to have this big bad, and we'll have these henchmen and these mobs, and they'll come in this wave and that wave. And then, we never use it. Well, guess what? We're going to leave that there for a few weeks. And now we're going to come back to it. It'll be on the pirate ship instead of the bar.
Yes. I think that's absolutely right. I love Schrodinger's encounter, right?
Yes.
I love that.
Oh, yes.
It's great. And I think too that you're saying, the most flagrant of that would be the kind of whatever door you open, this is the monster behind it.
Yeah.
I think that there are ways to do that are a lot more respectful. One of the things about it is sort of this thing of the first season of Dimension 20 was a high school for heroes, adventuring academy, and the genre we were very much in was actually kind of like a teen sleuth genre. It was very much like high school mystery solving, like someone's been kidnapped, it's like we gotta, and with that, you suddenly realize oh, hold on. I can absolutely structure this so that I am always on my rails and am never pushing the PCs there, because these guys are teen detectives, basically. If I put battles at where the clues are, I know that's a slam dunk, because these guys aren't going to stop looking for clues, right? So it's the thing of that's a perfect marriage of Railroad and Sandbox, where it's I don't have to pressure or goad or do that, that shell game of the encounter's over here. It's literally just as long as you guys mostly find these clues every other session, we know the combat's going to happen. That's groovy, right?
Yeah.
Was there a Nancy Drow in that teen sleuth?
There he goes.
Sorry.
I see sometimes, because my brain is poisoned by Dungeons and Dragons, and I go seeking out these questions and things online where it's accusations that it's a railroad if you put a combat in the way of what the group wants to do. It's oh, well, I don't agree with that at all. It could be that the bad guys are there because they want to intercept you, or whatever. There's any number of justifications in the world, but it's also one of those tricks as a DM that you use that's just sort of, I want to do something. The group, something that we're doing, the plot, the story, whatever you want to call it, is moving forward. My pieces of that are reacting. Yeah. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with this is the encounter I have when the goons show up. This is the encounter I have when you meet the lieutenant or whatever. The trick is, after decades of DMing, you just have those, and you can sort of be plunked down in any standard, scenario and be I know what's going to happen because the skeletons in a crypt is a standard encounter I have in my mind, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think it makes total sense. The idea of it's very funny for people to be like putting an obstacle in between your heroes and what they want is railroading, when that is the most central piece of writing advice there has ever been. It's like, you put an obstacle in between the hero and their desired goal? What the hell is that? It's like,
right. Do you even want to roll dice?
Yeah, it's storytelling. What are you talking about?
Otherwise, Frodo and then would have gone to the Eagles, flown over the volcano and dropped it, and the movie would have lasted 20 minutes.
Like, what should Tolkien have done? Like, put the Nazgul up on Weathertop and have the hobbits walking by, and the Nazgul are like, "We're here, but we're totally optional. Don't feel a need to get stabbed by the Morgul blade." Like, no. What the hell? No, that's great. But I think also to your point, there's like, it is not railroading to let's assume your PCs are playing heroes. They probably want to stop bad guys, and bad guys want to stop the people who are trying to stop them. That is completely realistic world building. So having your PCs be like, we're going to go wreck shop, and having a bunch of goons and henchmen and lieutenants be like, respectfully, no, we will fight you to stop you. And the reverse of that, of like, once your heroes are running around heroing, how scandalized are they, really justified in being if you're like, yeah, your enemies are sending powerful forces to stop you. They're like, why did bad guys just randomly show up? And it's like, I don't know, you've been collecting these 7 powerful orbs for a year and a half, and they really want those orbs to. What's confusing about this?
There's something about like the world reacting to the players is signaling that the DM's going to do what they want to do no matter what. And I'm just like, that seems like basic DMing 101, which is the world reacts to the players.
Yeah, exactly. If you look at most trajectories of a group of heroes, at the rate of encounter and leveling, I feel like most PCs shoot from 1st to something like 8th to 12th level in game in an amount of time that's often like 6 months, 8 months, a year and a half. It's
their semester abroad in adventuring.
Yeah, like if you're really hardcore adventuring, you can shoot up a bunch of levels in like a few weeks. And can you imagine being some, dark Death Knight character and being like, hey, do you remember when we went and raided that port town that had like the monastery and the sort of wizard academy and that mercenary order there? So a couple survivors of that just killed a young dragon, like a couple days. You're like, what? Some randos?
They've been on that grind.
You're like, they're grinding, dude. I don't know what to tell you. You'd be like, God, this is horrible. Like, yeah, they just dropped one of your worst monsters. And, like a couple weeks ago, they almost got completely trounced by a handful of goblins. And yesterday they dropped, a 13th level cultist. And you're like, oh God, this is a huge problem.
Now that Death Knight's reevaluating their life choices, like it took me centuries to become a Death Knight,
What is going out and being like, all of you bandits, why can't you do this? And they're like, we're not classed PCs, we're NPCs. We just have a stat block. There's not even a rubric for how we improve. And it's like, this is a nightmare. From now on, only PCs as lieutenants.
Yep. Now we're back to 3rd edition.
Yeah. If you look at like sporting organizations as the bad guys, they have scouts that go out and look at the up and coming talent. They're like, oh, you're going to want to watch this wizard coming out of the dock area. He's got a new form of magic nobody's ever seen before. It's like knuckleball magic or something.
Yeah, incredible. Well, that's also the problem. Oh, sorry, go for it.
I was just going to say, I find the next level of that is instead of enemy, like combats, is you throw the social encounters, the exploration encounters, like the next level of that to really, really get the PCs even more involved is like, what's your flaw? They send someone after you to deal with that. Like they found this out about you, that you have these weak spots that aren't, they can't get you in combat. Clearly you're just a force to be reckoned with, but you're still a person. And that like ups the game and sort of really elevates it, I found.
Yes, I love that, especially like having those other things. Yeah, the long running home game I have, the sort of the empire that they are staging a revolution against, is definitely it's like they're incredibly wealthy and powerful, huge armies. They also have this thing called like the Royal Alchemists Guild, which are all these weird steampunky super soldier, like, well, weird, like if someone tried to like systematize and make the like Henry Ford assembly line for Dr. Jekyll's and Mr. Hyde's, like get them out there doing their stuff. But they also have this like diplomatic core. And one of the things we've done a lot of in the campaign is setting up like, like the diplomats of this empire are maybe the scariest part of them, that like they are really good at playing enemies off of each other. They are really good at staging situations, using propaganda to make different factions see another revolutionary faction as their biggest enemy rather than the overarching empire. Like it's like, and that is very much a like you're saying, finding that weak spot of like, no one can mess with you magically, but what are you going to do about like the Crown just bought up every major newspaper and now the public sentiment is like turning against you. What do you do about that? It's like,
Yeah. The look on your player's face when you tell them they can't just fight their way out of this one, that this is like the grand ball or the king's court, like they're going to have to find another way out of this sticky situation is always a fun twist for some D&D players.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think that is a wild one, and it's very fun too. And one of the things I've had to make myself okay with in this, especially, this is a sort of interesting piece of advice for DMs that do get to like high level play. Like I have these 19th level characters, and one thing that I've just had to make myself okay with is for the verisimilitude in the world. Like they went to this airfield, this like skyship airfield of the Empire, and I went like, okay, they used to find these trivial at like 12th level, and now they're 19th. Do I really want to make this and so what I told them is I had a communication with them of like, guys, I'm not going to scale the world up to you. There are challenging encounters left in this world for you, very much so. Yeah. But is it going to be fun for you guys to just roll on through this airfield and just rock these guys? And all of them were like, we have spent 11 years grinding. We would love to rock some chumps and not even have it be close. That's great for us. Yeah. And I was like, cool, let's do that. And then we had the fun thing of doing a combat encounter where these guys are the Avengers and they're just mopping up some chumps. And they're like, God, this is rewarding for us, for it to be unquestionable. And there's still some, like, they took some hits, some damage happened, and they had to think tactically. But the fun thing was, it was like, for the encounter design of that, it was like, you roll up on this airfield with incredible magic. You're undeniably powerful. Can you stop any enemy biplanes from taking off to war nearby this? They have some messaging technology that you're not sure of. Can you locate that with magic and shut it down before anyone gets there? And for them, it was like, the challenge was never, are we in danger of dying? We know we're not. But can we show exactly how slick we are? And that can be really rewarding for high-level characters of that, like, the thing you see in a superhero movie of the heroes having, it's not the Thanos fight, it's the Act 1 thing of like, we're bantering and kind of, chill, and we're laid back as we just nail this encounter. It's really rewarding for high-level players.
Yeah, it's opening of Avengers 2, mopping up Hydra.
Exactly. Hydra, yes.
And it shows that, like, not all stakes in combat need to be life or death.
Yes.
Right? Like that there are combats where other things can be equally as important, and then that lets you build encounters for high-level characters, because at some point you're just playing rocket tag and there's not that many beings that are more powerful in the universe before they got to start taking on gods,
Truly. Yeah, I think those stakes are very interesting. And I think, like, when you're building those encounters out too, like you're saying, it's like, okay, you can't just hit them one-on-one. It is rocket tag at that point. So it's like, how many other factors can you throw into this encounter of things like, okay, yes, you're going to win this. Can you win it in a single round before this thing goes off? Can you do it under these circumstances with these negative things? Can you do it one hand tied behind your back?
Right.
And those kind of become the new challenges that are really
while
fun.
keeping this first level character alive.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, keeping civilians alive. That's big. That's big. That's a big market now. You can't have any destruction whatsoever
of cities. Yeah, it's very good. And I find that attitude towards both like coming at the players in different ways, not just combat, but then when it is combat, it's not just life or death. There's other things at stake. Like that's what opens the game up, and that's what turns, for me at least, D&D from this like it just does combat kind of hack and slash to we're just playing in this world, and what happens is up to you guys. We'll look at the rules when we need it. Kind of experiences at the table.
Yeah, high level play. It's so bizarre to have gotten to the point where there's actually some stuff to learn there. I was going to
say, how many campaigns? I know you have this long running one that went up to 20. How many of all your D&D has gotten up to high level play? Since that seems to be a point of like conversation on, is there enough support for high level play? But all the stats say that it never really gets that high. So. Because for me, it's only been a couple of campaigns have actually achieved upper tier play.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone, in 3.5 especially, there is this feeling of like from like 3rd to 8th level is this really fun window of like, I'm not a chump anymore, but I'm often very, very frightened. And you're like, that's a great place for kind of an adventurer to be. Campaign I finished got to 20th, so the one I ended when I was 17, that got to 20th level, which was absurd. But we were so kind of even as like 15, 16, 17 year olds, kind of like goofy on the rules in some ways, that it was still fun, and it was sort of like, yeah, this is crazy. You cast a wish, whoa, The one I ran during college, which was sort of fantasy noir, it was called Storm City. That one got to 12th level, and even that one was 3.5 starts to really hockey stick. 12th starts to get goofy, because by that time also all of me and my friends were 20, 21. So that was when we were like, oh, I can actually sit down and read this book and really, really crunch, right? Yeah. That was the one where my brother Griffin Johnston had this character who he had a wizard who just polymorphed into a 12-headed hydra, and it's just like, oh, that's all she wrote, folks. Like, there you go. I'm gonna make 12 grapple checks, and grappling at 3.5 is just broken to bits, and that's all she wrote. And my buddy Jack Covell, who is a lead designer for Heart Machine, great D&D player, who had at that point gotten, he had like gotten all these source books and indices and other stuff like that. He made a character in that campaign who used Magic Jar and a prestige class combo to make a character that made these mannequin homunculi that he could port Magic Jar his body into, but then when he did that, he had full spell casting in these sawdust-filled mannequins that he would just like Magic Jar into. So he would die, explode. When he got killed in that body, he would explode for like 15d10 damage, and then shoot back into his body in his toy shop somewhere and port into another mannequin. He also made a character that there's some Fiend Folio prestige class called Fiend of Possession that could possess inanimate objects, but then he had another class that allowed him to grant magic weapon abilities to other things. So, first fight, someone's like, I attack with my sword, I deal 28 points of damage, and he's like, I possess a nearby carriage and give it the brilliant weapon feature. I'm now a lightsaber wagon, and I roll through a crowd of enemies. And it wasn't like he was 20th level; he was like 9th level. And you're like, what the hell? They're playing.
They're two completely different games. I love the Magic Jar mannequin trick, because that's a D&D villain, right? Like that's you only thought you fought the bad guy. There, you get done with it, and you go to search the body, and it's stuffed straw and burlap sacks or something.
Yeah, that's some life model decoy shit. I mean,
there was literally a fight where they were hiding in the sewers under their enemy base, and there were a bunch of 12th level characters, but what they did was they just had a boat filled with these sawdust filled mannequins, and it was like, all right, you're up, buddy. And a mannequin would run in, fight, blow up, and the next mannequin animates. They're like, go, go, go. And it's just like this. And I was like, is this fun for you guys? Do you like this? Should I go? Do you just want to roll I'm going to get a snack. You guys tell me how the battle's going.
Here are the stats.
I now see where the manic downward spiral of your CEO characters comes from. It's just like this one guy. You're just like, really? Is this in the rules?
Yeah, here's the problem. The put upon us of the DM is this, right? I'm the master of the cosmos, but really I'm just one of your friends. Maybe, honestly, especially like my friends, that have been playing the game for as long as I have, you go there and you're like, I can't outwit one of you, let alone 6 of you. I'm doomed. What am I supposed to do?
Yeah. It literally takes me a week to figure out just to give you guys an hour's worth of stuff.
Yeah, I'm going to really bamboozle you with this enemy stat block that I found 3 days ago with your 8th level character that you've been playing for years and know every single optimization front and back. This is a really fair fight.
Yeah. I know that feeling very well. But I think you're describing a moment when a D&D DM goes, I'm going to be a high level DM. Because I think it's a perfectly legitimate choice to go like, nope, this is where I get off. I'll see you guys again at first level. And just to kind of play that lower level game, which is in many cases superb. But like getting up to higher levels, teens, and then into approaching 20, like you are playing a different game. Like,
yes,
this is very different. And I don't know how many DMs are like super into that.
It's really hard. Well, there's 2 things that are sort of bizarre about it, right? Which there's different problems. There's the problem of how do I make a combat big enough? And that actually is solvable. It just becomes scary because, like you're saying, it's rocket tag. You have glass cannons on all sides. With the 11-year home game, people took different builds. And it's one of these funny things where there's one PC who has an armor class of often 40 plus, pushing 50 in 3.5, 19th level character.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
You can't touch him. You can't grapple him. You can't look at him. You can't do, it's like, but the problem that character has is his build is that he's this untouchable saint, this like sort of divine soul. He has the saint template, and what ends up happening a lot of the time is it's like, okay, you're untouchable, but now in this combat, can you actually save your friends who are all glass cannons? Like this character's damage output is unreal. He can get dropped for sure. Mm-hmm. And so that element of high level play is very challenging because it's like, okay, we're going to have another combat. Either you're all dead or this is over in 20 seconds, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the other part of high-level play that's very challenging is the part of world's verisimilitude, which is like, okay, let's say you're fighting an evil emperor. What's really stopping you from mind-blanking everybody, scrying, teleport, lay down some 9th level spells on the capital, and that's it, right? And going like, and then also going like, do you guys really want to go like build a home and do something? You're all 20th level. Isn't it kind of incumbent on you to solve? It's the Superman problem. Like, why are you resting? Go solve every single problem in the world.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Don't be an Elminster. Don't just go running around chasing tail across the multiverse. You got to fix this world's problems. Yeah. And so
There's
I think I was going to say, I think it's something that like either having a world that's flexible enough and open enough that when the characters get there, you can accommodate it, or like factoring it in from the beginning, like wherever they go, whatever they do, there will be adventure. Like if it's the emperor, then the next thing is that emperor's infernal patron, or something like that. There's always a next big bad, and you might have to leave the material plane to go find them.
Oh, definitely. Oh, come on, you got the whole planes out there. Come on.
Right.
That's a very funny thing. When I'm making like stat blocks for these characters, I like, because of the way the different PCs sometimes have made their builds, the spread on armor class can be like 15 to 20 points, where it's like, well, one PC has a very respectable 23 armor class, and then this other guy's got a 45. So if I'm like, to make a monster that is capable of hitting this guy, it has to be a monster that cannot miss this guy. Like, how do you do that, right? So it's a very funny thing of like, we're going to compromise. The monster's got a plus 30 to hit. Okay. So, it's like a plus 27. So like, it can still miss you on a 2, but it needs to hit a 19 to hit you, or something crazy like that.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah. Balancing that out, because Pruitt was usually the combat optimized player, and it was anything I can do or throw in here to challenge this guy is going to wipe the floor with everyone else. So figuring out ways to challenge them was very satisfying. Sometimes it was, your friends are in trouble. You, Mr. Combat, you need to get over there and save them. It's not all about you in the spotlight.
I usually tried.
It's true.
I tried.
Right. We are coming up on our time here, but I always feel bad. I don't like cutting short a conversation, but time exists. The real world is what it is. Brennan, where can we find you? What do you got going on? What's happening in your world?
What's happening in my world is this: new episodes of Dimension 20, which is College Humor's actual play show, every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Go over to dropout.tv and check us out. You get Dimension 20. It's an anthology. We play D&D 5e, but in wild, weird settings. The one that we have going right now is called The Unsleeping City. It's a D&D game set in a magical version of New York City. Hey, forget about it. We're questing here. But we got that. We also have Adventuring Academy, which is our podcast where we talk about theory and craft behind the game. We have Adventuring Party, which is our talk back about where the cast sort of shoots the breeze about what we're doing in the previous episode of the show. You can find me on Twitter at BrennanLM and on Instagram at Brennan Lee Mulligan. Hell yeah! Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. Pruitt, you want to take us out of here?
Most definitely, man. Well, Brennan, once again, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure having this chat. Really enjoyed it. I've watched the first probably 5 or 6 episodes of The Unsleeping City. So a lot of fun. It was a great opening, especially with the whole Santa thing. It was just candy cane zombies, the whole thing. It's a lot of fun. But yeah, we'll everybody keep a lookout for Brennan out there in the world. It's an absolute pleasure as a DM. But y'all come back here, next time here on Web DM, and we love you. Bye.